safety, glamour, and opportunity. These used to be the three unshakable pillars when people talked about Manhattan, the city long hailed as the beating heart of America. But by 2025, this city now stands on the brink of losing it all. No one ever imagined that Manhattan, a symbol of order and power, would one day become a maze of darkness, decay, and vice creeping into every street. In 5 Points, a place once marked by immigration history, is now lies a hotbed of crime, squalor, and hopelessness. In the East Village, art gives way to street chaos and disorder, and near Harlem, local gangs and the homeless crisis are gradually replacing the role of order. Each neighborhood tells a different story, but they all reflect the same thing. Manhattan is teetering on the edge of collapse. Is this the price Manhattan is paying for uneven development, for neglecting the vulnerable people at the bottom? On today's journey, let's temporarily forget the dazzling neon lights and skyscrapers of Manhattan. Instead, look towards the dark corners of the city as night falls, where terrifying truths are hidden that no one wants to face. And the reason behind all of this might surprise you. Manhattan was once the place where, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. Now, even surviving here has become a daily struggle. Once an irreplaceable symbol of America, Manhattan is where everything runs like a well-oiled machine, from Wall Street to shopping avenues, from art squares to sunny cafes in Greenwich Village. But as we enter 2025, that image seems to be fading. It wasn't due to an obvious collapse, but rather because of increasingly deep cracks. Silent, but spreading. One of the clearest manifestations is the increase in social and security instability. Manhattan once recorded approximately 7,440 serious crimes, with a rate of 4.57 per 1,000 residents. By 2022, this figure had risen to 5.7 cases per 1,000 people, reflecting a slow but steady upward trend. While not a shocking number when placed in the context of an increasingly out-of-control urban lifestyle, with incidents occurring in broad daylight in neighborhoods that were once safe, this change is nothing short of a red alert, warning a city on the brink of collapse. At the same time, the homelessness crisis in Manhattan has become an inseparable part of the urban decline picture. According to the Hope Survey in January 2025, in just one night, there were 4,504 unsheltered homeless people across the city, a 9% increase from the previous year, and notably, over half of them were living in the subway system. Manhattan, the commercial and cultural heart of New York, is also the area with the highest concentration of temporary camps, with tents pitched close to train stations, under staircases, and around public parks. What's noteworthy is that while some peripheral areas of Manhattan show slight signs of improvement, the crisis in the center continues to worsen, particularly for vulnerable groups like children, the elderly, and asylum seekers or immigrants. Perhaps what many people are wondering about isn't the existence of the problem, but rather the feeling that Manhattan is gradually getting used to its parallel existence. A city that once represented control and order is now learning to coexist with the instability that is gradually taking over every street. And if that silence continues, what will be left besides the glittering facades that cover a discolored Manhattan? We've just given you an overview of what's really happening at the heart of America. Don't take your eyes off the video, because we're about to take you deeper into the epicenter of the crisis unfolding across Manhattan. Are you ready yet? Let's move on to the next part. If you've ever seen Martin Scorsese's film Gangs of New York, you've probably stepped foot in this place, at least through the screen. The scenes of chaos, violence, and lawlessness that you see in the movie are not fictional. They are built from the true history of a neighborhood in the heart of Manhattan, once the immigration center of the United States, and also a place where dreams were buried in mud and the stench of sewers. The place is called 5 Points. Few can imagine that this area, located less than a 15-minute walk from Wall Street's financial skyscrapers, was once one of the worst slums in the world in the 19th century. Previously, this was a freshwater pond called Collect Pond, which once supplied clean water to the entire city. But after being filled incorrectly, the ground became unstable, foul-smelling, and unsuitable for stable construction. The makeshift rows of houses built on weak ground quickly became breeding grounds for diseases like cholera, measles, and typhoid, especially in overcrowded tenements like the old brewery, a building that once saw people logging out of the server every night for 15 years before being demolished in 1852. 5 Points became home to the most vulnerable communities: Irish immigrants, African Americans, Germans, and Italians. This is a crossroads of cultures, but also a meeting point for poverty, discrimination, and social ills. Tap dance, an American cultural icon, is said to have originated here from the combination of Irish footwork and black dance. But if tap dancing is the sound of hope, then outside, the city echoes with the screams of danger and despair. Can you believe it? Even the police were wary of entering 5 Points. It's not because they're afraid, it's because they know that in that dark maze, they can't control anything. The state of autonomy permeates every alley, when official laws exist only on paper and gangs create their own rules. The tragic events that unfolded at the intersection of West Broadway and Chambers Street, where subway cars went out of control, sparked a long-standing debate about justice, safety, and fear within the city. 5 Points was once a symbol of the desire to settle, but is now a symbol of distorted memory. The people living around here, if any are left, don't dare to mention the old name. Family restaurants have been replaced by empty chain stores, and the old cracked walls now covered with a new layer of bricks. But the smell of history, still smouldering beneath the ground, couldn't be masked. Our generation once believed that Manhattan was the city of order, of faith and opportunity. We used to think the darkness of 5 Points was a thing of the past. But walking through Lower Manhattan today, among the streets around Baxter, Worth and Moscow, one can't help but feel something chillingly familiar. The weary eyes of people living with danger every day, the damp passageways leading into bunkers, and the eerie silence of a city that was once bustling. So, does history truly end when no one dares to mention it anymore? Or is it just repeating itself in a new form with a more modern disguise? If a place that once fell to the bottom of society is now becoming a reflection of all of Manhattan in 2025, what does that say about America today? If you're planning to hit the streets in the East Village, hold onto your wallet tightly, because this is the neighborhood that received an F grade for theft crime rates and is among the most dangerous areas for this type of crime. The East Village was once considered one of Manhattan's safest, friendliest, and most open neighborhoods. But according to recent data, it is among the lowest ranked places in the country for personal safety, with an average of 4,208 thefts per 1,000 residents annually, and some areas experiencing rates as high as 1 in 17 people having lost property. This neighborhood received an F grade, the lowest on the scale. The problem isn't the material loss, but the feeling of being pushed out of the very place you once belonged. Those who have lived here since the 1980s, who saw the East Village transform from an artist district to a mixed residential area, are now unsure whether they should step out after 8 p.m. A visitor to the East Village shared, "I've never seen a place as chaotic and out of control as this. The law here seems to exist only on paper, while crime and social ills take turns dominating every street. The cause is largely due to the area's urban characteristics. The combination of dense commercial and residential areas creates an environment prone to unwanted intrusions. Retail stores, the very soul of the East Village, have become hotspots for losses. Streets like Avenue A, 2nd Avenue, or the area around Tompkins Square are now described by residents as being much more targeted than before. The East Village didn't collapse overnight, but it's gradually losing what once made this place special, the feeling of belonging, of living freely without worry. When a neighborhood that was once the cradle of art and community also falls into a state of unrest, is something silently cracking within the spiritual structure of this city? And if so, when will we realize it? If you walk to the intersection of 9th Avenue and 31st Street in 2025, just behind Penn Station, you might witness a scene that makes many passers-by stop. A long line of red and blue tents made of tarpaulins, wooden pallets, plastic sheeting, and anything that could provide shelter from the wind for people who no longer had a place to return to, stood close together along the sidewalk. The problem here isn't just a lack of housing, it's the spread of a phenomenon that was once considered temporary. According to a report by the Coalition for the Homeless, as of mid-2024, over 140,000 people in New York lack stable housing, a record high since the Great Depression. Of these, nearly 1/5 are over 55 years old, and a significant proportion have held full-time jobs, lived in neighborhoods that have since been gentrified or been pushed out due to the rapid increase in living costs. In Manhattan, areas once considered temporary, like the West Chelsea corner, the area near the FDR Drive, or the Grand Central Tunnel entrance, are now becoming semi-permanent residences. Tents spring up in clusters, forming mini-cities within the larger city. Local residents, already accustomed to seeing homeless people in central parks, now face a new reality. Their neighbors are no longer the tenants on the same floor, but a group of informal residents living right next to the walkway, just outside the bakery or family clinic. The proliferation of temporary camps not only raises concerns about hygiene and safety, but also serves as a quiet reminder. The social support system is no longer keeping pace with reality. Many policies have been announced, from the shelter hotel program to social housing development projects. But slow progress, limited scale, and complex procedures have left many people behind. Some people say they waited for months to be approved for assistance, but were ultimately forced back onto the streets because they didn't meet the requirements. Even more concerning is the growing sense of normalization. As tents appeared on every street corner, people began to see them as a natural part of Manhattan, just like traffic lights or old newsstands. And when human presence no longer raises questions, perhaps the most frightening thing has happened. Society is learning to accept the invisibility of a part of itself. So, if even people who are clearly present on the streets are gradually becoming invisible in the eyes of the community, what is truly disappearing from Manhattan? Housing, compassion, or the very essence of a society that once promised not to leave anyone behind? In recent years, a series of policies regarding urban development, housing, and welfare budgets in New York have sparked controversy. Instead of focusing on keeping the city diverse and inclusive, many programs are widening the gap between the wealthy and the rest. A prime example is the preference for high-end apartment projects, where a studio apartment can be listed for over $5,000 per month, while the waiting list for social housing stretches for years. The zoning bonuses development policy, which allows investors to build higher or denser if they dedicate a portion of their project to affordable housing, is theoretically a balanced option. But in reality, many supportive apartments only exist on paper or are located on hidden floors with no shared access with the official residents in the same building. This creates a sense of stratification right within the place of residence, where discrimination is no longer at the neighborhood level, but exists right within each wall. Additionally, the hotel voucher program for the homeless, once touted as an emergency solution during difficult times, is causing tension with local residents and nearby businesses. Some older hotels in Midtown have been converted into short-term rentals but lack investment and supporting systems, leading to a decline in both infrastructure and public safety. Instead of integration, this model unintentionally creates separate blocks between resident groups, without anyone truly feeling protected. Meanwhile, welfare budgets, especially for the elderly, disabled, or low-income workers, have not kept pace with the rising cost of living. A report from 2024 shows that the majority of rent assistance packages have remained at the same fixed payment level as 5 to 6 years ago, despite housing prices increasing by 50% in many areas. All of this leads many to ask, who is the city's true target customer? When local shops are replaced by luxury brand chains, when retirees have to leave their apartments because they can't afford property taxes, when young people want to stay but can't afford the down payment, then Manhattan still shines, but it doesn't nurture the warmth of the city's soul within itself. A worker living in Harlem shared in a street interview, "We don't need incentives or privileges. We just want to live and feel like we belong." That's not too much to ask, but it seems to be becoming increasingly luxurious. And if a city begins to gradually eliminate those who can no longer afford to live there, at what point will it lose the very soul that once made it unique? There are places that are not just a neighborhood, but a chapter in history. Harlem is just such a place. In the 1920s, it was known as the cultural capital of the African American community in the United States, the birthplace of jazz, modern art, and pioneering thinkers. Streets like Lenox Avenue once buzzed with the sounds of saxophone from nightclubs. Local barbershops were hubs for discussing current events, and each home held the memories of a close-knit community. But as 2025 dawns, many streets in Harlem take on a different appearance. Quiet, sparsely populated, and illuminated by the glow of minimalist cafes with price boards not meant for long-time residents. What was once a community cultural center is now a high-end real estate investment destination. And with each luxury apartment that goes on sale, another family has to leave, quietly, just like the old photos being taken down from the walls of their homes. The change is not just about architecture, but also about spirit. Landmarks that were once iconic, such as the Apollo Theatre, the Schomburg Bookstore, or the 125th Street Market, now stand alongside global chain stores, creating a blend of nostalgia and displacement. Local residents say they feel Harlem is still here, but it's no longer ours. That saying encapsulates a loss that isn't on paper, but in the gaps between people and memories. A man in his 60s who grew up here shared that he no longer recognizes the neighborhood where he used to play soccer with his friends on the sidewalk. He said that in the old days, every family knew each other, and children played in the common yard until late at night without any worries. Now it's different. This neighborhood is no longer safe for anyone. Harlem is not in decline. It is still vibrant, still attracts tourists, and is still mentioned in the media. But what makes many people the saddest isn't the change itself, but the feeling of being replaced. Family-owned businesses are closing because they can't afford the rent, and schools that were once community hubs are now being consolidated or relocated. Children growing up here will no longer have the memories of Harlem that their grandparents once did. And perhaps that is the immeasurable loss. If a community is changed to the point where even those who built it no longer feel they belong, can we call that development? Or is it simply another way to rewrite history without publicly erasing it? There are historical moments that pass, leaving scars. But there are also times when things continue silently, like a wound that seems healed but still aches faintly from within. For Manhattan, the COVID-19 pandemic is not just a chapter in the past. It's a ghost that still lingers in every breath of the city, silent but never leaving. Many streets have not yet regained their former pace of life. Office buildings that were once bustling in Midtown still have dozens of floors that haven't been lit up again. Many family-owned businesses that had been open for 3 generations closed permanently because they couldn't survive after 2020. The small eateries that were once familiar meeting places for local residents are now replaced by empty storefronts covered in "for rent" signs. Urban spaces, once associated with constant movement, now have moments of stillness that seem to stretch on endlessly. But what's even more haunting are the invisible transformations. In psychology, in social structures, in the connections between people. The feeling of unease after the pandemic has led many people to lose faith in the inherent stability of the system. They witnessed hospital overcrowding, delays in financial assistance, and job insecurity. And to this day, when life seems to have returned to normal, that feeling, the feeling of vulnerability, still hasn't left. Some urban experts call the post-COVID era the age of new distance, not just between classes, but also between regions. Neighborhoods that were previously low income, such as Harlem, Washington Heights, or the South Bronx, are recovering much slower than areas like Midtown or the Upper East Side. There is still a significant gap in access to healthcare, technology, and education. And that distance, over time, can become destiny. It's also understandable that many long-time residents feel Manhattan is no longer itself. It's not because of the obvious changes, but because of the silent gaps that are hard to name. The city still moves, still has lights, still has tourists, but somewhere, there's still a feeling that something very human, very real is missing. And if a city like Manhattan, once thought to never sleep, is still grappling in the darkness of a past event, perhaps what we need to look back on isn't just what was lost, but rather, what is preventing us from truly recovering. Manhattan is not just a city. It is a mirror reflecting the ambition and identity of the entire United States for over a century. This place once symbolized modernity, efficient operating systems, and the ability to start over with just 2 hands. But by 2025, what's happening in Manhattan seems to be cracking that very symbol. Not with noise, but with the prolonged silence of a quiet and persistent urban decline. From the makeshift tents on the Chelsea sidewalks to the worried eyes of Harlem residents, from the unease spreading throughout the subway stations to the distance between old and new residents in high-rise buildings, it's no longer just the story of one borough or one city. But it's a signal, a sign that issues once considered local are becoming increasingly universal. Many people look at Manhattan and believe, this is something that only happens in big cities. But perhaps that's a dangerous way of thinking. Because if even the United States' leading economic, financial, and cultural center cannot preserve a sense of security, community cohesion, or the ability to care for the vulnerable, then the bigger question is, where can? We have seen similar situations in many places. Increasing income inequality, housing crises, a lack of community spaces, and the inadequacy of social support systems. Manhattan is just an example magnified by the media spotlight. But that doesn't make the pain of other places any less. Because if a city like Manhattan can change to the point where even its own residents no longer feel like they belong, are other places truly safe from that wave? And if we see what's coming, but still choose to turn away, what will be left to keep America from losing itself? Manhattan is still there, with its twinkling lights, crowded streets, and bright billboards stretching to the horizon. But behind that glamorous facade, perhaps the most important thing is slowly disappearing: the sense of belonging. When people no longer feel safe in their own neighborhoods, when memories are replaced by price lists and protective fences, when averted glances outnumber handshakes, we are forced to ask, is this still a city for everyone? None of us can turn around an entire city, but we can listen, share, and preserve memories as a way not to forget the values that once made this place special. If what you just watched resonated with you in any way, please leave your thoughts in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so we can continue to tell stories that not everyone is willing to listen to, but everyone needs to know. Each share is an opportunity to add one more person who understands, one more person who cares, and one more ray of hope for those whose lives are lived in silence. This video is not intended to condemn any organization, individual, or political group. All information presented is based on publicly available data, official reports, and field observations from multiple perspectives. The stories, images, and perspectives presented are educational in nature, reflecting social realities to stimulate constructive discussion without creating incitement, panic, or stereotyping. We do not condone any illegal behavior whatsoever. We do not normalize suffering, and we do not turn human misery into entertainment. This is not a conclusion, but an invitation to reflect together, to dialogue together, and to hold on to the remaining humanity within each of us.